2023, the stock was well over 1,000 rupees. As Rajesh Exports now at 100, still locked in lower circuit despite the company clarification. Now, joining us to discuss this subject further is Hetal Dalal, the President and CEO at the Institutional Investor Advisory Services. Hetal, good afternoon. Thank you for taking time out. Yes, every year over the last 3 years, we have seen an instance like this appear that dents a lot of this investor confidence, right? It was Brightcom in 2024, Gensol last year, and now we have something like this in Rajesh Exports. What as advisors you would tell investors, as Sonal also flagged off plenty of red flags that one should look at. What do you do in instances like these?
Sonal covered a lot of ground in terms of what are the red flags. Let me add maybe 2 or 3 things. One is when you need to look at aging profile of receivables and aging profile of payables. This is disclosure that you see in annual reports, and when you see that receivable positions are over 2 years or 3 years, and payable positions are over 2 years or 3 years, that's something you should certainly ask. I think the other piece is just look at the transparency in the annual report itself, right? When you look at Rajesh Exports annual report, for example, there's a single line item, revenue from operations. There's really no disclosure on what's really happened or what the breakups are. So you find some of these issues which you can get better clarity on tend to not be there in the annual reports where you're seeing some of these issues. I think more importantly, when you look at the assurance functions, right? There are 2 checks, and the checks and balances of the system are through 2 or 3 things. One is just having a strong internal audit, which should report to the audit committee. The second is to have an audit committee which actually has expertise. Rajesh Exports Audit Committee comprises of people with gems and jewelry expertise. It doesn't have anyone with any kind of financial expertise or accounting expertise. And the regulation today says financial literacy, which is a very vaguely defined term. And you have the promoter on the audit committee, which is a fundamental conflict of interest, right? So your internal audit hasn't functioned. It's reported the audit committee is already conflicted because the promoter is there and you have 2 other members who don't have any expertise per se in looking at some of these structures. And then you have the statutory auditor, which is the other function, right? Now, the statutory auditor, I mean, given the list of things that SEBI has passed out, and these are all 101, basic things that the statutory auditor should have picked up. So one of the things you need to then ask about is the quality of the statutory auditor in the first place. You have most of the operations coming out of, a global entity in Switzerland. The Indian entity has nothing. Now you have a firm which hasn't really audited too many listed companies, and a joint statutory auditor, which is essentially a proprietorship. So the question you have to ask is, do they have the capacity to audit a company of this nature? The second question to ask is, what is their revenue dependence on the audit fees that Rajesh Exports is paying? This is something that we've been saying time and again in terms of just ensuring audit independence, that there has to be some better disclosures on how to assess audit independence, and the audit committee should be validating that on an annual basis that the auditors are indeed independent. In this particular instance, given all of you are saying, I fail to understand how the auditors didn't pick it in the first instance. You have a whole set of very, very obvious things which are violations which has been booked into the accounts, which is a problem. The other way, so that one is just to look at the company and some of these nuances in terms of governance structures, assurance functions, right? The other way to look at it is also comparables. Now, a company which is basically doing tolling, right, gold refining, is reporting a margin of 1% or less. Does that even fundamentally make sense? And if you look at other companies in similar lines of export, I think margins comparable. For a company which is, let's say, reporting margins which are significantly higher than peers and with similar line of exports, there has to be some magic sauce, and you've got to figure out what is it that they're doing differently vis-a-vis the other players because of which margins are higher. Similarly, margins are significantly lower. You have to wonder what is the kind of cost being booked for the margins to be basic, margins to have almost disappeared at less than 1% in terms of operating margins, right? So these are some of the issues in a very sort of brief nutshell that one can look at, but ideally you look at it from the company level, and you have to look at it from a peer comparison level to get a broader picture. And then you have what we call the smell test, right? There is the obvious smell test. You will see a lot of these red flags, some misses. The AGM last year was held in December. There are some filings which have not been done. So some of these things don't really smell right, and that's something you should worry about.
That's very important. Whatever you mention, apart from some of the red flags, the point that AGM was delayed, filings are not done, look like small things, but they say a lot about where the company's focus is really, and most important on the auditor committee as well. Having a promoter on that independent committee really doesn't make it independent, right? So in that case, now things have happened. And the stock has come off from, say, 800 to 100. So, of course, some people are aware about it, but a lot of retail investors are still stuck in that. So what do these SEBI's interim orders really do? How do they really help retail investors? Because now it's in lower circuit, they can't really get out of it. So how is it helping them at all?
I think SEBI can only come in after the fact. There has to be an embezzlement for them to, or some of these deviations to happen for them to actually run an investigation. The interim order sort of stops this from continuing, and it puts everybody on guard. And I think that's an important piece. See, without the SEBI interim order, you may suspect that something is happening, but you don't really know the details. And to that extent, SEBI's interim order is actually quite speaking, in the sense that it tells you a lot of the details. And I would encourage all retail investors in the stock to actually read that order. It's very, very well written. It's come out with a lot of details. And most importantly, it's talking about the fact that the company has not been cooperating with the regulator, which you also see in terms of rating agencies, right? When you look at the outstanding rating on Rajesh Exports, the Brickworks rating, or the rating agencies that the company is not cooperating. These are all additional signs. But to come to your sort of point in terms of what SEBI does, I think it just prevents anything further from happening. The promoter is basically on guard, and it also creates more awareness from the investor point of view. But SEBI can't prevent stuff like this. SEBI can only come and create structures, create regulation to protect, but actual action you can't really do. You also have to understand when there's an issue of fraud happening, it is always happens in collusion. It doesn't happen with one single individual, and that is mindfully done, knowing the regulatory environment, knowing the systems and processes. So it's a bit hard to say that SEBI is going to prevent it, but the interim order does help bring out some of these issues.
So in that case, we spoke about the red flags that an investor can keep an eye out on. What SEBI can do, the interim order will allow at least no further investments till the time there is more clarity. In this case, now if there is a clarification which is coming from the management, where they are saying now they will cooperate with the agencies, and the revenues are not inflated, they are all fine. Do they have a mechanism to do that? And I'm just trying to understand what next, what happens next for companies like this? What has been the past experiences?
So typically when SEBI comes out with an interim order, then they will run some further investigation and come out with a final order. So if the company is now decided to cooperate with the regulator, it's a good step, a little too late, but at least it's better late than never. And SEBI will come out with a final order, following which we'll see what happens, but SEBI will come out with directions at the final order as well. I'm actually surprised, even when you look at the interim order, that SEBI has not pulled up the board and the audit committee for some of the shenanigans which have happened. Yeah.
Indeed, plenty of other questions, Hetal, but running out of time. So thank you for sparing time and joining us today this afternoon on this very important subject. And of course, a lot of retail investor interest here as well. That was Hetal Dalal on the issue of Rajesh Exports. Now take a short break, back with more on the other side.